that there was a point in your life where you didn't have the courage to approach somebody out in the wild. Because, I mean, good-looking guy, you know, in the prime of their life. It makes me it actually reminds me of, we've had a few conversations on the show recently about the mental health crisis, and specifically how it's affecting boys and young men, and just how society lately over the past few decades has really kind of let down boys and young men from the just the standpoint of mental health, and how like support systems and that used to be in place are no longer, as society has sort of shifted away and adopted a this attitude towards masculinity that seems to be really counterproductive.
What's like an example of that? I'm so curious. Like how, in what way, what was like a support system that boys used to have that they don't have now? Or is there what transition have you seen?
Well, it's just that masculinity used to be celebrated, or at the very least not something that was seen as shameful. I mean, now, young boys are warned of the concept of, they're warned of embodying, what's referred to now as toxic masculinity. And I think that's really problematic. I mean, just the fact that term now not only exists, but has permeated the zeitgeist to the degree that young boys are familiar with it. I think that's a problem. It's not something that existed when I went to high school. Boys will be boys and girls were girls, and each gender was celebrated for their differences, and appreciated as such. And I think now it can be potentially difficult. I mean, obviously I don't know, I'm not in high school or elementary school, but rates of suicide among boys in their 20s are orders of magnitude higher than it is for girls. And
is the idea that they are taking their lives or harming themselves because they now are confused? Is it because they feel a sense of shame about parts of themselves that they've been told are just inherently bad, and then they judge themselves for that? What's the connection between the two?
Well, I think it's multifactorial. I think part of it has to do with the fact that boys are not given, from a young age, they're not given the vocabulary with which to express what's going on in their inner world. They're not, I think girls are more often asked to express how it is that they're feeling, whereas boys are asked more to express what it is that they're doing. I think that there's a rise in fatherlessness. Or what Warren Farrell, who's an expert in this topic specifically, we've had him on the show. He's a great guest, brilliant expert. Dad deprivation, the failure of male role models to have a presence today in the lives of many boys. And then I think the media plays a role, the fact that they're growing up, there used to be the archetype in movies and on TV of really masculine, strong men. And now I think that those images are somewhat harder to come by. And so I think it leaves boys feeling, I guess, unmoored to some degree. And then of course all the usual stuff that's affecting everybody more broadly. Social media, I think, is playing a role. We're seeing a rise of body dysmorphia and eating disorders, body image issues in boys and men. And I think support for women in that regard has started to become more widely available, but I think it's an underappreciated phenomena in boys and men. So I don't know. I think it's multifactorial.
In a sense, my brain goes to this being almost a surprising conclusion in some ways, because or a surprising connection, because I would almost imagine when I think of being at school, in high school, definitely some of my moments of feeling great or feeling powerful were moments where I stepped into that very masculine energy. But that masculine energy was also responsible for many, many times where I felt not good, where I felt inadequate, or where I felt, scared, or where I felt in some way, like I was making comparisons that made me unhappy. It's funny because I would almost have imagined that having less emphasis on masculinity being where young boys' worth comes from would make space for boys to be either more of themselves or to be more accepting of where they're not the same as other people, where they're not the tallest guy in school, where they're not the strongest guy in school, where they're not the most athletic, but create a kind of wider range of ways that boys can feel accepted or worthy. So it's interesting, the idea that it goes the other way. That if you're kind of, maybe one would argue, if you're shaming masculinity, and that masculinity then in whatever form has nowhere to go, then that leaves people feeling unmoored, as you say, or it leaves them kind of not, denying some part of their nature. But I don't know. Often I feel like between men, women have to deal with men, and that's hard for women. But men also have to deal with men, and in a different way, and in a lesser way, but still in a very real way, men have to deal with men.
Yeah.
And the effects of whatever you want to call it, whether it's toxic masculinity or just aggression, violence, the men also have to deal with that, and it creates a lot of misery in men's lives too.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think a lot of good has come from the sort of the redefining of masculinity, because you're right. I mean, like, boys are different. Like, it's I for example never fit into the stereotypical image of what a strong masculine boy was, because I was never an athlete. Like, I wasn't into sports. I was more into art and music and computers and the internet and stuff like that. But it's similar, I guess, to in the same way that the Me Too movement in many ways was great and needed, to disinfect a lot of the mistreatment of women in various industries, but particularly Hollywood, which is where it began. But I think that movement also, there was a dark side to that movement where suddenly it left men feeling scared to express their masculinity. And you saw a lot of people being shamed and ostracized for behaviors that weren't necessarily as pathologic as like the Harvey Weinsteins of the world, So yeah, I mean, it's obviously a complicated issue, but I think part of the complex that has left men feeling maybe more uncomfortable today is the fact that they're being told all of these different and opposing messages about what it means to be a man.
Yeah, well, that for sure, it's become confusing, I think.
Yeah.
I think, and the different factions that seem to have spun off from that confusion is like true, like it's a strange world right now. I wasn't even aware of like communities that are now online and the things they believe until the last year or two. I didn't know. I didn't get it. I didn't understand where what, when people would say things, I was like, that's not really a thing, is it? Like, people believe that, or it just didn't. I was really surprised. And then you dig into those worlds and you realize, wow, there's a lot going on right now.
Yeah.
And things in terms of what people have, conclusions people have come to.
Yeah. It can be very confusing.
Hey, if you liked that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.